Welcome to Top Shelf Word Salad, where Ben and Jason talk about books, music, movies, and media of all sorts. Alright.
Dope.
So what did you think?
So we're going to talk about we're talking about journalism here, right? That's the main thrust. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to get one thing out of the way that I think it could sidetrack us and is maybe a little irrelevant.
Okay.
As a journalistic piece of writing, this is dog shit.
Yes.
I mean, it's awful. So I'm sure this is a professional journalist. I'm sure she's been trained to whatever extent people get trained anymore.
Yeah.
But she refers to herself. The method of her quoting is almost snarky. It's not systematic at all. It reads like an op-ed. And I mean, I think what we want to talk about is how the source material relates to the end product.
Absolutely,
so that we should reserve time for. But I just want to get it out of the way that this is a piece of shit article. Like, the way that it's written, the quality is just not there.
It's unbelievably terrible, in my opinion. Like, I there was something about it that's why I was so interested in it in a way. Interested in us talking about it. It's just that, I mean, goddamn, you know, it's so unbelievably disingenuous and so unbelievably just lacking in integrity that I kind of felt like, wow, you know? Given the fact that I was able to hear the entire, like, word for word interview.
Yeah, and there's an implication too, which is the Times is, I mean, it's not an it has a good reputation, right? Mm-hmm. It's a long-standing institution. Most people are reading articles like this, and they're not taking the time to go through the source material, so they're getting a version of something that happened. And if this example, like, happens with any frequency, then people are just not reading what's going on.
Right. Yeah. And you know, I saw her. I just kind of looked into her a little bit after the fact, and I saw her interviewing Bret Easton Ellis. You know, live, like, at some, I think it was a bookstore. He was promoting a book, so it was part of his book tour, I'm sure. But it was still like she was the person picked to be the interviewer for one of, you know, in my opinion, even though there's a bunch of his stuff I can't stand, one of the better writers of the last 30 years. I mean, his writing's amazing.
Bret Easton Ellis, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, some of the, like, I couldn't get through American Psycho. By the end of it, I couldn't deal with it. It was too.
Oh my god, I loved it.
Oh man, when it got to the rat,
it was a slog.
When it got to the rat, I just threw the book across the room. I felt like I was going to be sick. But I mean, that's a big, weird compliment to his power of not only narrative but visualization of narrative within the mind of the reader. You know, because it just made me ill. You know. But
it's supposed to. I mean, it's well, we could go into that for a long time too. But so you said that you saw her interviewing him, or you read a piece that she
No, it's a video on YouTube. You can check it out.
Yeah. I'll check it out, and what might be interesting for you and for me would be to revisit Charlie Rose's interview of Bret Easton Ellis from a long time ago, but that is probably an example of a very good interview.
Yeah.
I don't know the quality of the one that you saw, but it might be an interesting comparison.
It was fluffy. It just didn't have, you know, she didn't. But I mean, the whole thing was. I would have to watch it again to be honest in my summation of it, because I watched it coming off the heels of this, and so I was kind of primed for being disgusted with her, which which I might be unfair about without watching it with a clearer kind of somewhat non-biased brain. Yeah.
Good perspective, Jason. Very adult of you.
It won't last through any more of this.
And now it's over.
Right.
So we watched this. The interview was in 2 parts, and it was like 3 hours long. And it was one half was the actual interview with Jordan Peterson. I cannot remember this woman's name. If you remember it, say
Decca Aitkenhead.
Yeah. Okay. And so the half of it was her discussion with him, and his daughter was there, kind of mediating. But the other half is just the pre conversation and dialogue that was with the journalist Decca and Mikhalia.
Mikhalia, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, and it's a little confusing because the way it's laid out, they do it in the opposite order. So if you just listen to the full 3 hours, you'll hear the interview first. But I think it's important to note that the other conversation came first.
It is,
between
definitely.
This journalist and the daughter.
Yeah, I think they reversed it just for marketability reasons, which was probably a smart thing to do in terms of the YouTube video, because more people are going to be interested in hearing his interview than Mikhalia's kind of pre-interview boundary talk, you know.
Yeah, and it is hard to listen to. Yeah. I mean, she speaks with a lot of speed and energy and a lot of detail, and maybe it's not all that relevant, but the reason I think the context is important is, the job of the journalist is, or maybe the job of the book reviewer, or just the person that's providing the media to back something that's coming out, is to have the conversation and then to distill the big idea or the big couple of ideas. And so I think it's important to realize that she did talk for an hour and a half on one day and listen through to how she had the conversation, and then know that she had 24 hours to sleep on it, when it certainly seems like she was either then or had already formulated what she wanted to say. Then she had the interview. I think that's important because the way that I read the article is that it's far different from what Jordan Peterson was trying, or actually in fact said, on the Zoom call.
Yeah, I mean, it's just in every way. It just seemed to me like to be an absolutely perfect example of everything wrong with journalism in this time. It was just, it just made me kind of ill.
So do you have like a big beef with it? Like one thing that stuck out?
Well, everything that he said, I mean, part of it, I think, for me, and maybe I'm a big softie or something, is that he's just so emotionally raw in this thing. And he's in tears through a couple portions of it. He goes and gets a towel because he feels like, and he tries to make a joke out of getting a towel because he's going to need it for the waterworks or whatever. But he is extremely forthright and honest from his perspective, and is aware of the fact that he's being honest from his perspective, and he's not trying to make, I never get the sense with what he's saying that he's trying to make his perspective some type of universal, but he is trying to speak to what he sees from his perspective as foundational truths and foundational aspects of just what it is to be alive. And that's what Maps of Meaning was more or less about. Very foundational concepts of, that's how he can relate so much to suffering. Because that's this, I mean, in the same way that a Buddhist would.
Right.
So he takes a lot of care in detailing his thoughts and the purpose behind his thoughts and the goals he sees for those thoughts, and she just warps them as much as she can to a kind of tribalistic, propagandistic representation of what he's saying that she thinks will appeal to a specific reader base.
Yeah.
And it's sickening.
And I agree with you 100%. In fact, I was talking to Christina. So if I'm the journalist and I just had this 3-hour conversation with these two people, I think there are two storylines that emerge, and you can craft them how you want, but I think you have to pin the whole story on these two storylines. The first one is what you just mentioned. So he is raw, naked, vulnerable, emotional, and specifically at the beginning, he's emotional about the response that he has gotten, that he gets every time he's walking around. And he basically gets choked up thinking that there are so many people that are so hungry for any kind of direction, that they're seeking him out and they're talking to him. And so you feel the gravity that he must feel, or he does feel, for where he is and what he's been doing. He also gets emotional just about what he's been through and his family.
Sure, yeah. But those are two separate things in a way, like within his framework of how he's talking about. And when he really quick, when he does talk about people coming up to him, he always talks about it with there's always a slight tone of bewilderment, which to me, I don't think he's faking that.
Right.
And if he's not faking that, and he is genuinely bewildered, and it doesn't like he's just amazed that he has 600 million views on YouTube and blah blah blah, as well as all these people coming up to him, that is, to me, speaks to a certain humble nature. He isn't thinking, of course you're coming to me, I am the badass clinical psychologist who has a brain of fire and words of wisdom. He's just shocked,
and that's how he comes across. That's how he's always come across. But I think there is room for somebody to interpret that what he's doing is a bit of an act. So if you're the journalist and you rightly find this as one of your storylines, you are free to pitch it as, this is the genuine emotion that comes with this crazy rise in notoriety, or you head on say it's not believable and you talk about why. Like, you could do it from either side, but you have to recognize this was one of the big things that you got out of the conversation. So that was the one, the emotional, the getting choked up, the having been away from it for a while, getting back into it was like, I thought, news. The second thing is that this year is a crazy psychedelic shit show for this family, right? Everything they've been, I think the other story, maybe the bigger story, is just like, what the fuck is going on with people traveling across the world and the middle of COVID, and people getting weird cancer, and people like wanting to kill themselves, and like all of that was the other big story. And I think there are two sides to it. Either you take the sympathetic side where you're like, this is just unbelievable what tunnel this family's gone through, or you say a lot of this stuff doesn't add up. It's weird. Nobody's mentioning the names of hospitals and doctors, and and she actually puts that kind of slant on. She rightly pulls that story out. I think she's a little bit. I think she's quite negative, like toward the actual structure of the story. She puts herself as a character in there, bewildered by what she's just heard.
Right. Okay, and then stops there on purpose.
Yeah.
She could have researched that.
Yeah.
She could have gone in depth and asked, questions about, look, I want to verify these things just so that it doesn't get this slant. Therefore, do you mind if I were to verify the different places you've been and blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to get that info.
Yeah.
And in not, in any way breach doctor-patient privilege type stuff.
Yeah. Instead, it leaves a reader feeling like with like almost dumber for the experience of having read it.
Yes.
Like it should be the job of the person writing it up to go like, okay, so this thing doesn't, they like literally black and white. This part doesn't make sense. Like, because I asked a question, I looked, and this seems a little weird. And my guess is it didn't happen. Like, you could be that blunt. You should be that blunt about it to give your reading of the situation to your audience as a journalist.
Yeah. And instead of like opportunistically jumping on what you see as gaps.
Yeah.
Oh, look at this gap. You could research the gap. Well, I'll just leave the gap because it makes the story less, cogent and balanced, and I don't know.
Yeah. So I did not care for that either. So I think she got to at least the right story for that part of it, but the way it was treated, I thought was awful. And the fact that the recordings are there, especially the recording with Mikhalia, right? If you listen through the whole thing, and it's an hour and a half, I mean, it's really long, you can hear this reporter, Decca, building this sympathetic relationship with Mikhalia, with the way that she's hearing Mikhalia, and then how, what she's interjecting in between the little phrases, the tone. It's dripping with sympathy. Once you read the article, it seems clear to me that she was just trying to get as much detail as possible, that she could farm different elements of what had happened.
Well, and then totally cut Mikhalia off at the knees with, if there was, what did she say? Like, if there was one person that I thought would help me in a time of the crisis, on par with what Jordan's going through, it would not be her. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's a freaking horrible thing to say.
That's the sort of period on the sentence that began with, in this horror movie, the daughter seems to be the director. Right, that's how that whole thing started.
Yeah,
so it's the article's back. The background is right on him, but then I think she leads with that. That's her metaphor.
That's early. Yeah,
and yes, the daughter did say it's like a horror movie, because that's what she, and then she relates that for 90 minutes, but that's the way, that's your take on it, is you're going to say this is she, and you're the director of the horror movie, and at the end of that, this is not the person that you would want to trust your life with.
Right. Yeah. Which makes her the horror of the horror movie.
Right.
The person who's too much of a horror to direct the horror movie. And it just, which of course doesn't make any sense given the fact that all of this is happening to them randomly. It just kind of made me, I wanted to talk about it with you because it made me so unbelievably ill at ease.
Yeah, it did me too. I wouldn't have read it if you hadn't sent it to me. I certainly wouldn't have listened to it, because I told you, I don't ever really pay attention to news. Like, maybe like this much. I read headlines and that's it. And it's partly for this reason.
Yep.
Because I feel like if something important enough is happening, I know I'm going to have to sit down and spend a bunch of time to understand it. So I go in with the assumption that 95% of it is just not going to be
garbage.
Important. And I'll have to catch up. If something is important, then I'm going to have to catch up to it. And it's better than wasting like so much time on the front end trying to sort it out.
Well, and so much of what has become news has become something that's like spectacle peddling, and it has to be something of a spectacle in order for it to be marketable.
Yeah.
And in order to make it a spectacle, in the case of this person, what you do is, in the case of Decca, is you draw all of the opportunistic elements you can find of a specific story into a format that will be the most palatable for a specific reader base, and you then market your like virtue essentially, or you almost market your marketability to that reader base in such a way that it makes you look good, it makes the paper look good, or the publication look good, and it conveys a specific ideological message. So it's really ceased to be anything that in any way seems like journalism and seems more like tribalistic propaganda.
And Jason, I'm gonna be cynical.
Yeah.
That's all any of it is. Like, that's a big statement. So I am probably exaggerating, but when it comes to news and journalism in 2021, it is all material to generate revenues for companies that own these outlets, right? Yep. I am sure you can make your argument for where free press might exist, but the strength, like the power of people's interest in news as entertainment is evident. We can sit here and complain all day about how Walter Cronkite type journalism doesn't exist. It doesn't exist because we, as a society, as consumers of this information, want it to be entertainment.
Yeah.
And so that's what we pay for.
Or at least prefer that, you could say,
Yeah.
You gravitate to that instead of actually paying attention to something that's unbiased and detail-oriented.
And it's a crime. I mean, I say we, I'm just talking about us in general.
Yeah.
Me,
I know.
I miss journalism as an art form. That's, unbelievably difficult job when it's done right to balance these things. There is no such thing as lack of bias. So you've got to be able to not just recognize all the different biases you might possess. You have to find a way to present all that in a way that's sort of balanced. It's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's sad to me that people aren't interested in doing it.
Yeah, well, I think it's proven to be less marketable because what gets the headlines and what gets the interest? A lot of times it's spectacle, and it's the fire of people being angry at each other or something. And in a way, did you ever? There was a documentary that came out called Best of Enemies. Did you see that?
No.
It's totally worth watching. It's very, very good. It's about the heart of it is the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago, where Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley kind of squared off against each other, with Vidal being like the left and Buckley being the right. And Vidal really got under Buckley's skin. And Buckley at one point gets, threatens violence and calls him a queer. He actually, for that time period, that's a huge thing, right?
Right, yeah.
It's just ridiculous. But the ratings for it were through the roof, So, 1968, you can see the birth of, Fox News and MSNBC right there, between those two men, hurling insults at each other. Vidal called him a crypto-Nazi. That's what made him so mad.
Vidal called Buckley a crypto-Nazi in 1968?
Yes.
What would crypto-Nazi even mean
I
in
don't.
1968?
Exactly. And
a hidden not. Like you're a Nazi, but you're not really like showing it.
Yeah. I guess at that time, who knows? But Buckley had mentioned that he, had fought Nazis. And then Vidal says, "No, you didn't. You didn't see any action. I've researched you in your time." And that's when Buckley gets really mad. And so Vidal must have been right. I've never looked into that, but maybe Buckley was, like a journalist in the army at that time in France or something. By the time, I don't, whatever.
But yeah, he's getting debunked on something that obviously means it's like badge of honor for him.
Right. It's got wiped out, rug torn out. Yeah.
And in the dimension that you bring up is that we as an audience love it. We're like, oh, he fucking called him a queer. Like, oh my God, this shit's getting heavy.
Yeah. 1968, people going, OMG. And it just becomes gladiatorial.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, you feel the stone under your ass as you sit in the stands watching people slice each other up a lion's jaw and the remains. I mean,
just love it.
Why can't people move beyond this stuff? I mean,
we love that stuff. So what else?
Leave it up to the listener.
Anything else about, like, anything you want to get across here?
I don't know. I didn't want to go through the article bit by bit. I think anybody that wants to take the time can do it. And it's just the idea that if journalism is supposed to be something that is about what happened, I'm going to tell you what happened. That should be something that doesn't. It just seems maybe I'm just unbelievably naive, and if I put myself in this situation, it'd be much harder. But it seems like it wouldn't be too difficult to allow for as little bias as possible, and to up front say any bias you may have, and just say, this is what happened. I may be biased in this way, but this is what happened.
Yeah, you are correct, and that's not what happened in this case.
No, right. It was such the opposite end of the spectrum.
So what should have been done is you record, you let it roll, you ask short questions, you listen, and then you take it away to compile it. And you do draw out the stories like I was talking about. That's part of what you have to do, and you put your stamp on it. But this is not that.
No. Instead, in the first paragraph, she talks about him being a victim. She implies him being a victim of his own toxic masculinity.
Yeah. She wants that to be her summary. Like,
yeah, it's so unbelievably transparent.
Yeah.
In its propagandistic, format and just intention, and I mean, just an inarticulate utterance is the best review of.
It's not even a thumbs down. You're not even wrong.
No, you're right. Yes. And that was Polly. Was that Polly?
It was Polly. It was the See, we learned something. So, before we leave the subject, can I take it to a super cynical place?
Please.
You cut it out if it doesn't belong.
No. So, I'm down with super cynical.
Here's something that's happening. Jordan Peterson's releasing a book in a few months. Okay? Mm-hmm. He's going to make a lot of money from this book. The Times is an outlet for getting publicity out. Stirring up controversy is a way to ensure that you get more money in sales for the book. And so you have a recipe here for generating publicity simply based on what we're talking about. So it could be, the cynical part of me says, yeah, the time scheduled this interview. It wasn't supposed to be journalism. They're trying to sell shit together. And the idea was Jordan knew that the reporter was going to take it to this place that all media takes him to. And he knew that the next day he was going to throw up the full audio to try to grab headlines, right?
Right, yeah.
So like this all plays out to the financial advantage of Jordan, right?
Oh, yeah.
So the cynical part of me is like, how the fuck did you get a book written, edited, recorded for audio over the last 12 months in the circumstances as dire as you're describing to all of us, for sale in May, that you've decided get it out the door is the only way to to be done with it? It's not like he would love to edit it and make it a better product, but he's at peace with saying, nah, it's probably a piece of crap, but I got to be done with it. So if you're a cynical person, you're kind of like, are you and I talking about this because we're going to buy his book? Or we're on the fence, like we're part of that fringe audience that wants to know more about the guy because he is so self-effactive, he is so articulate, so direct, so unassuming. Like I can't go as far as saying this whole story is made up. I just can't. I can't believe that based on what I hear. So I'm in that, like I am that audience, but it's media, it's money, it's
right. I know, I totally see that, but at the same time, I'm not like defending him. But the only way I would say there are elements that might counter the cynical narrative to a certain degree are that, he did comment multiple times on how, like, the writing of the book is something that basically kept him alive through the whole process, which totally makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Like, if you have a connection to some kind of creative outlet, it can get you through just about anything.
And you can, right, and I don't mean to interrupt, but one of the most heartbreaking parts of the interview was when he was sitting at the typewriter and he couldn't type.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're a thinker and a writer and you're immobilized in this position, like that made me emotional, like listening to it. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, and then with the timing and marketability of the timing, he started off the interview by saying, I'm sorry it took so long for this. I know you've been trying to get us to have this interview with you for a long time. And she agreed. And I don't think that's something she would agree to if that hadn't been the case, because she's not in his camp.
Right. Yeah. No, she's not.
So, unless she got duped into saying that somehow, just by trying to be agreeable at the beginning, which, I mean... Maybe. And then the third aspect for me is that his emotional rawness, I mean... He would have to be like Laurence Olivier, or Gary Oldman, or somebody to pull it off with this level of what seemed like sincerity. I mean, you'd have to be a master actor to do that.
You would, because it's emotion that you hear and you actually start to get choked up yourself. Right? That's how you know. Yeah. That's how you not know. That's how you feel it.
You feel it, yeah. It's got like a weird cadence that you would never be able to pin down in terms of what it is that sparks emotion in you. But there's something in the way, in its delivery, that comes off as utterly genuine.
Yeah.
That I think just about anybody listening to it would feel. But I mean, I could be wrong about that. I'm depending, if you're like, I fucking hate this guy,
Yeah.
You'd go into it thinking, oh, it's so transparently, manipulative, and he's no better actor than, Mark Hamill in the first Star Wars movie, which people love to bitch about Mark Hamill, the first Star Wars movie. I think Mark Hamill was great in the first Star Wars movie.
For the record.
He's the clueless hero,
Yeah.
I mean, he played it cluelessly, which is exactly what he should have done. So I don't know. Anyway,
dude, we have to have another discussion about that.
But yeah, the whole thing. There was something about that made me titanically sad.
Yeah.
It just seemed like I don't know. What's it called? A watershed moment or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Flipped a switch and it just felt awful.
Just awful.
Well, this might cheer you. So if you're the cynical person, this won't cheer you up, but this might cheer you up. After I was done with all of this, I did a Google search today for Jordan Peterson Times. That was it, I think. And I did the Google search and did the news. Only 3 references came up. I mean, basically, so this article does not seem to be like, if it's supposed to generate all this buzz, it doesn't look like it is. And so, and if you're cynical, then you're like, okay, that's not working. And if you're not cynical, then you're like, well, good, maybe this sort of negative treatment isn't attaching itself too broadly.
Yeah, it might be so over the top that even the people who are over the top find it unpalatable.
Right, maybe. Yeah, maybe we vote that way too. Maybe it's like clickbait. It's like those stupid, like, look at this actor now. Look at these 47 actors now, and then for whatever reason, you go click, and then 20 minutes goes by. Like, what did I do? Why?
Are all the titles of things that say destroyed in the Ben Shapiro destroys, small child.
What? Okay, I'll check that out. That seems newsworthy.
The small child says, maybe minimum wage isn't a bad idea. Haven't you ever read Thomas Sowell? What?
It's the pizza delivery guy.
Right. Out of my house. No tip for you.
You did an impression, Jason. That was good. That's your...